In the burning heat of a 1,970 seconds California night, Kris Kristofferson walked off stage. The cheers still echoing, a half-empty bottle of Jack Daniels trembling in his hand. To the world, he was the golden outlaw, poet, pilot, Rhodes Scholar, movie star. But behind that rugged charm lived a man quietly unraveling. His mother had called him a disgrace for abandoning the military. His lovers saw the brilliance fade behind a haze of whiskey and guilt. Each song, from Sunday morning coming down to help me make it through the night, was less a performance, more a confession. As Hollywood crowned him its rebel prince, his body began to betray him. A swollen liver, a faltering memory, and a mind haunted by what fame had stolen. This is not just a story of glory. It's a story of pain, redemption, and the price of a restless soul. This is the untold truth of Kris Kristofferson. Welcome to Hollywood Mysteries. Before the whiskey, before the fame, there was silence. The cold, military silence of a household where love was earned through obedience. Kris Kristofferson was born in Brownsville, Texas, in 1936, into a lineage of soldiers and expectation. His father, a decorated Air Force Major General, believed discipline was the only religion. His mother, a woman of Southern pride and sharp words, measured worth in medals and manners. In that home, feelings were folded away like uniforms. Pressed, hidden, and only worn when absolutely necessary. From the beginning, Kris was different. He wrote poetry instead of war reports, played music instead of drills. He admired Hank Williams more than generals, and when he dared to say so, his mother's response was chilling. You were born to serve your country, not to entertain its sinners. In this story, her words would echo for decades. The seed of shame that grew into every verse he ever wrote. By his teens, he was a prodigy of contradictions. Straight A student, star athlete, dreamer. He earned a Rhodes Scholarship to Oxford, where he studied literature and philosophy, dissecting human emotion like an enemy strategy. But while others spoke of Plato and Milton, Kris stayed up late in smoky pubs, writing songs about broken men and the smell of cheap beer. That duality, the scholar and the sinner, became the architecture of his soul. When he returned to America, West Point offered him the life his parents demanded. Prestige, uniform, legacy. And for a moment, he tried. He taught literature to young cadets, lecturing on loyalty while quietly longing for rebellion. But the more he taught, the more he felt trapped in a uniform that didn't fit his skin. He once said, "I wasn't running away from honor. I was running toward honesty." Everyone, that honesty, cost him everything. In 1965, Kris resigned his commission, packed his guitar, and drove to Nashville. His father, furious, threatened to have him committed. His mother's letter arrived soon after, the one that would haunt him forever. She wrote, "You are an embarrassment to this family. Do not come home. You are no longer our son." It's a day too. For a man raised to equate discipline with love, those words were a death sentence. Kris didn't cry. He simply folded the letter, placed it in his guitar case, and carried it like a curse. In that moment, he became both orphan and outlaw. A man with no family, no country, only songs. In Nashville, he swept floors at Columbia Records, cleaned studios at night, and slept in his car by the river. Every rejection from a producer felt like another echo of his mother's voice. Yet the pain became fuel. He wrote, "Sunday morning coming down," in a haze of loneliness, turning guilt into melody. The song wasn't just about hangovers. It was about the ache of existing after everyone has stopped believing in you. That's what made his music dangerous. He didn't write about glory. He wrote about the mornings after. About the silence after applause. About the man who has lost everything except his truth. But the irony was cruel. The more he bled into his lyrics, the more the world adored him. And the more the world adored him, the lonelier he became. The Hollywood spotlight would later magnify that wound. The boy disowned by his family, now worshipped by millions, yet still chasing a mother's approval that would never come. Kris once admitted, years later, when you're told you're worthless, you spend the rest of your life trying to prove it wrong. Everyone. And so he did. On stage, in film, in every self-destructive act that followed. Every bottle, every broken marriage, every role soaked in pain. It all began with that letter. The letter that turned a soldier into a poet and a son into a ghost. For Kris Kristofferson, the root of his genius was the same as the root of his suffering. He wasn't just writing songs. He was writing his way back home, to a place that no longer existed. The road to glory rarely begins with applause. Sometimes, it starts with a mop and a broken guitar string. By the late 1960s, Kris Kristofferson was living on the edge of survival in Nashville. A former soldier turned janitor, he swept the floors of Columbia Studios, listening through the walls to legends, recording their dreams while his own songs gathered dust in a notebook. He wasn't invited inside. He was the man who emptied their ashtrays. Yet every night, after the lights went out, he stayed behind. Sneaking onto the piano bench, recording rough demos by the faint glow of a single bulb. The security guards called him the Ghost of Music Row. Aid. He wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing meaning. A reason for what he'd lost. When he wrote Sunday Morning Coming Down, it wasn't a song about hangovers. It was a prayer disguised as despair. The lyrics painted loneliness with brutal honesty. No way to hold my head, that didn't hurt. Johnny Cash heard it, saw the truth behind the pain, and gave Kris his first miracle, a stage, a microphone, and an audience. Cash performed the song live on national television. A rebellious move, since network censors wanted to remove the word stoned. Cash refused. And in that defiance, Kristofferson's voice reached America. Overnight, the janitor became a songwriter. Soon came Help Me Make It Through the Night, For the Good Times, and Me and Bobby McGee. They were not just country songs. They were emotional autopsies. Each lyric, a cut into his own history. The world saw beauty. Kris saw confession. He said once, I was writing about things I couldn't say out loud. Aid. But success came with a hidden contract. The man who had fled structure now found himself trapped again. This time, by fame. Record executives wanted a clean, marketable outlaw, not a philosopher haunted by guilt. He was pushed to tour endlessly, drink endlessly, smile endlessly. The poet became a product. To numb the exhaustion, he turned to the same bottle that had always waited in the corner. Jack Daniels, tequila, whiskey. It didn't matter. It was the same silent companion that never asked him to explain himself. During this rise, a different kind of calling came. Hollywood wanted the rugged troubadour with Oxford eyes and outlaw hands. They cast him as the romantic drifter, the doomed hero. Roles that mirrored his reality too perfectly. In Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, 1973, he played a man hunted by his past. In A Star is Born, 1976, opposite Barbra Streisand, he lived out his demons on film. The tortured musician, drowning in alcohol, loved yet lost. Audiences wept. Kris didn't need to act. He was simply showing them his reflection. Yet behind every standing ovation was a hidden cost. Fame brought power, but it also magnified his self-destruction. He began missing shows, arriving drunk, vanishing for days. Friends whispered that he was on a slow suicide mission. But what no one knew was that he carried a medical warning. His liver was swelling, dangerously enlarged. A doctor told him it was the size of a football. Kris laughed, ordered another drink, and said, "Guess I've still got a game left in me." Today, Stu Bray, he wasn't being arrogant. He was being honest. For him, every performance was another way to die beautifully. On his own terms. The more he achieved, the emptier he felt. His family still refused to speak to him. The woman who once called him a disgrace had vanished from his life completely. And now, standing before sold-out crowds, he realized that applause could not replace forgiveness. He wrote, "Loving her was easier than anything I'll ever do again," as an elegy for peace he could never keep. It wasn't about a single lover. It was about every moment he'd ever destroyed with his own hands. Still, the world adored him. The Grammy Awards came. Gold records hung like medals. Ironic trophies for a man raised by soldiers. But Kris couldn't celebrate. He felt like an imposter standing in his own skin. Fame was the new uniform, and it fit just as painfully as the old one. At parties, he was charming, magnetic, even mythic. But friends said he had a look in his eyes, something lost, like a soldier who'd survived the war, but missed the battlefield. There were nights he'd drive alone into the desert after a concert, no destination, just headlights and silence. Once, a friend found him sitting on the hood of his truck, staring at the sunrise, whispering lyrics to no one. When asked what he was doing, he said, "Trying to remember why I started." Today there, by the late 1970 seconds, Kris Kristofferson had become both legend and warning. He had everything. Money, awards, fame, beauty. Yet the cost was staggering. The artist who sang about freedom was now enslaved by expectation and addiction. He had traded the barracks for the stage, but the orders were the same: perform, obey, endure. Still, even in the chaos, there was grace. On stage, when the lights dimmed and his gravel voice cracked on a line, the audience could feel it. The vulnerability that no other star dared to show. He wasn't pretending to hurt. He was hurt. And that's why people believed him. Kris Kristofferson's rise wasn't a victory. It was an act of survival. He once told a friend, "I never wanted to be a star. I just didn't know how to stop bleeding in public." Today there, and that, perhaps, was his truest confession. That every triumph was another wound reopened, every song, a way to keep himself alive a little longer. The rise had come. The sacrifice was still being paid. And soon, the cost of love would come due. In the cruelest way possible. Fame had made him untouchable, but love would make him bleed again. By the mid-1970 seconds, Kris Kristofferson seemed to have conquered everything. Platinum records, sold-out arenas, a hit film with Barbra Streisand. Yet the man behind the spotlight was falling apart. His greatest war wasn't with Hollywood, but with the woman he loved most. Rita Coolidge. When they met, the world called them the royal couple of country music. Their voices blended like smoke and silk, their chemistry electric, almost cinematic. On stage, they were a perfect duet. Off stage, they were a slow-motion tragedy. Rita once said, he could be the sweetest man alive. And then suddenly, he wasn't there anymore. And proofs. It began with small cracks. Missed rehearsals. Silent dinners. Nights when Kris would vanish after a show, returning at dawn smelling of tequila and exhaustion. He would mumble apologies, kiss her forehead, then disappear again. The same man who wrote about tenderness now couldn't find it in his own home. The drinking wasn't pleasure anymore. It was armor. Each sip a way to quiet the ghosts that whispered his mother's words, "You're a disgrace." And proofs. Rita tried to reach him through music. Together they recorded Loving Arms, a song about holding someone who is already slipping away. The irony was cruel. She was singing to a man who was already lost inside himself. Every night, she later recalled, I felt like I was singing him back from the edge, and every morning, he was gone again. And self. Behind closed doors, arguments replaced affection. She wanted a family. He wanted escape. The road became his refuge. Fame became his justification. He began using success like a shield. If the world still loves me, I can't be broken. But the truth was the opposite. Every concert, every headline, every drink pushed him further from the man Rita fell in love with. Their love story hit its breaking point one night after an award show. A tabloid photo captured Kris drunk, arm around another woman, eyes unfocused. Rita found the newspaper on the breakfast table the next morning. She didn't scream. She simply said, "You're killing yourself in slow motion, and you're taking me with you." Then she walked out of the room. Later, Kris would say, "I never wanted to hurt her. I just didn't know how to stop hurting myself." Is his process. The collapse was gradual but merciless. Their daughter, Casey, became a fragile bridge between them. One moment, a shared joy. The next, a reminder of everything slipping away. When Rita miscarried in 1977, it shattered what little peace remained. Kris drowned his grief in whiskey, unable to face the idea of loss again. Rita, exhausted and heartbroken, filed for divorce 3 years later. Their marriage had lasted 7 years. The same number of years it took him to climb from janitor to icon. Fate, it seemed, had an obsession with symmetry. The headlines were brutal. The king and queen of country split. Kristofferson's drinking destroys his marriage. He tried to laugh it off, telling reporters he was fine, but close friends said he'd sit alone backstage, staring into space, whispering the same phrase over and over, "I blew it," is his process. And yet, even at his lowest, he turned pain into art. His 1980 album, To the Bone, was a confession carved in vinyl. The lyrics bled regret, I can't be your hero anymore." His voice, once smooth and rich, now cracked like dry earth. Listeners called it raw and beautiful. Kris knew it was just truth. Then came the cruel twist. Hollywood, the machine that once adored him, now mocked him. His role in Heaven's Gate, meant to be his cinematic masterpiece, became one of the most infamous flops in movie history. Critics called it an unqualified disaster. The film's failure nearly bankrupted United Artists and crushed Kris's career overnight. The same newspapers that once printed his wedding photos now called him box office poison. For Kris, it was the final betrayal. His body was failing, his marriage gone, his reputation in ruins. Doctors warned him his liver was swollen to dangerous levels. One even told him bluntly, "You keep drinking like this, and you'll be dead in a year." He nodded, lit a cigarette, and muttered, "Maybe that's the point." There were moments, fleeting but real, when he tried to fight back. A few sober weeks. A few phone calls to old friends. But the silence inside him always returned. He was a man, raised to be perfect, worshipped for being wild, and punished for being human. That contradiction had finally devoured him. One night, after a show in Texas, he locked himself in his dressing room. A crew member later found him sitting on the floor, surrounded by empty bottles, clutching his guitar. He wasn't crying. He was humming. The tune was soft, almost like a lullaby. It was "Why Me, Lord?" The gospel song he had written years earlier, as a man seeking salvation. The irony was unbearable. The song that once saved him was now the only thing keeping him from disappearing. When Rita Coolidge spoke about him years later, her voice was still tender but distant. "I loved him deeply." But you can't save someone who doesn't believe he deserves saving. All lay, do one. And in that single sentence, the tragedy of Kris Kristofferson was sealed. He had fought wars, won Grammys, conquered Hollywood. But he couldn't win the quiet war inside his own heart. By 1980, the rebel poet who once dreamed of freedom had become a prisoner of his own legend. And the final act, the fall, the illness, and the haunting truth, was about to begin. The spotlight had dimmed. The applause had quieted. And for the first time in decades, Kris Kristofferson could hear something terrifying. Silence. In that silence, the ghosts returned. The woman who had called him a disgrace. The lovers who had left him. The dreams that fame had buried beneath the noise of guitars and whiskey. By 1981, he was 45 years old and exhausted beyond recognition. His once golden hair had dulled, his voice rasped like sandpaper, and his body was beginning to betray him. A doctor's warning haunted him. Your liver is the size of a football. One more year like this, and you won't have a next one. All lay, do one. He laughed when he heard it, but deep down, he knew the truth. He had crossed the line between survival and self-destruction long ago. What followed was not a dramatic collapse, but a slow, relentless unraveling. Kris became a ghost of his former self, drifting through movie sets, forgetting lines, canceling tours, losing track of days. The man who once wrote verses with surgical precision now struggled to remember his own lyrics. He blamed the drinking, the exhaustion, the years of pushing himself past every human limit. But it wasn't just the alcohol. Something deeper, darker, had begun to eat away at him. For years, doctors misdiagnosed him with Alzheimer's disease. His memory flickered in and out like a dying bulb. There were days he couldn't remember the names of his children, nights when he'd wake up and not know where he was. His wife, Lisa, watched helplessly as the man she married faded before her eyes. He was taking all these medications for things he didn't have, she recalled, and they all had side effects. It was like losing him twice. All livery. Friends I've are livery by. But the real truth would come much later. And it would shock everyone. In 2016, doctors discovered that Kris had never had Alzheimer's at all. The years of confusion, memory loss, and near paralysis were the result of a tick-borne illness, Lyme disease. He had been suffering not from age or alcohol, but from a silent infection that had invaded his nervous system. For over a decade, he had been treated for the wrong illness, prescribed toxic drugs that nearly destroyed his mind. When the truth came out, it was both relief and tragedy. Because the cure had come after years of damage that could never be undone. The irony was almost poetic. For decades, Kris had been misunderstood. First by his parents, then by the industry, and finally, by medicine itself. He had spent his life fighting invisible enemies, expectations, addiction, and now, disease. Still, there was a strange kind of resurrection. Once the Lyme diagnosis was confirmed, proper treatment began. Slowly, fragments of memory returned. He could recall lyrics again, faces, stories. One day, he looked at Lisa and whispered, "I think I'm back." With Urated raising, it wasn't triumph. It was survival. Quiet, scarred, but real. In the years that followed, Kris withdrew from the world that once devoured him. He left the glamour of Hollywood and retreated to Hawaii, trading cameras for sunsets and microphones for peace. He worked on small farms, played guitar to the sound of waves, and found solace in simplicity. His days of whiskey and neon were gone. His mornings began with coffee and silence. For a man who had spent a lifetime trying to prove his worth, anonymity felt like mercy. Yet, his legacy refused to fade. The songs he'd written decades earlier. Sunday morning coming down, me and Bobby McGee helped me make it through the night. Continued to haunt radio waves and hearts alike. Younger artists called him a prophet, a poet, a rebel who had told the truth when no one else dared. And for the first time, he didn't reject the praise. He just nodded and said softly, "I was lucky to survive my own words." With Urated raising, the world would eventually forgive him, but Kris never fully forgave himself. There were too many ghosts. Janice, Rita, the unborn child, the mother who died without reconciliation. Every interview in his later years had a shadow behind it. When asked about regret, he smiled that familiar crooked smile and said, "I've got a lot of scars, but I earned them all." With Urated raisins, in one rare moment of vulnerability, he told a journalist, "I used to think I was drinking to die. Maybe I was just trying to feel alive." With Urated raising, it was the closest he ever came to confession. The line between destruction and survival had always been thin, and Kris had walked it like a tightrope his entire life. When he finally stepped away from performing in the late 2010 seconds, it wasn't with fanfare or a farewell tour. He simply stopped showing up. The man who had once defined rebellion chose to fade away quietly, without spectacle. His son said later, "Dad didn't need applause anymore. He just wanted peace." And that peace after so many years of chaos, finally found him. In 2024, when the news of his death broke, tributes poured in from across the world. Artists, soldiers, and fans alike called him a warrior poet. But the most powerful tribute came from his old friend and mentor, Willie Nelson. Kris was the only man I knew who could write a song that broke your heart, and then live it twice. That was the essence of Kris Kristofferson. A man whose genius was inseparable from his suffering. He turned pain into poetry, guilt into grace, and regret into legacy. Every scar, every failure, every bottle, every verse, they all led to the same truth, that beauty can grow from brokenness. His story isn't just about addiction, or fame, or even redemption. It's about what happens when a man refuses to stop searching for meaning, for forgiveness, for peace, even when it costs him everything. In the end, Kris Kristofferson didn't die a fallen star. He died as something rarer. A survivor who finally made peace with the ghosts that haunted him. And perhaps that was his greatest song of all. The one he never had to sing. This is the tragic truth of Kris Kristofferson. Welcome to Hollywood Mysteries.